Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 50 by 50, whatever happened to the Harvard class of 1976. I'm Michael Conniff. I'll be your host, and I'm joined today by the remarkable Jane Borthwick. Hi, Jane. Great to have you here. Your
Yes.
name has come up more than any other, I think. I wanted everybody to know that this was Jane was my first call on this, other than Chris Taylor, who was nice enough to do it 3 years ago. So about 2 months ago, I was like panicking because I hadn't done anything, and I was like, I said I was going to do it. I've got to do it. So who do I call? I call Jane Borthwick. The let's call you the most pivotal person in our class for a lot of different reasons. But so Jane was supposed to be the second one, and guess how many? Guess what number you are?
I don't know.
You
50?
you are the 30th. And what I'm going to do is, because people have been started to ask me about it, I'm not going to get. You're the last one before reunion. Um, but I'm going to definitely keep going at least for the month of June, and we'll definitely get to 50 before I stop. And if by popular demand people want me to keep going, I probably will keep going because it's been super interesting, and the response has been so great. But this is your podcast, Jane, and I was thinking of you and your career and you at Harvard, and what always comes to mind when I think about you is like how much more elegant, mature, um, poised you were than anyone I knew freshman year. I really mean that. And when I think of you also, I think of global citizens. So can you start by telling us, like, you had an unusual and peripatetic childhood, to say the least. Can you kind of summarize that for us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I was born in New Zealand, and my parents are both New Zealanders. And my father was one of these people who was always interested in what was going on in the world. And so when he had an opportunity to get a special fellowship from the New Zealand government, in fact, to both to study it at Cambridge for a while and later in the US, and sort of became an expert really on nuclear physics, but also particularly
Hmm.
health physics.
Hmm.
And he had an opportunity to go to Pakistan with his family, with all of us. So I have four brothers, no sisters, but four brothers. My parents packed up and went to Pakistan, thinking it would be a two-year assignment. Well, it went from Pakistan to the Philippines to Thailand to Vienna to Afghanistan, and then after college, they were spent most of their career in Africa. So
And
that explains.
I know you have you got, I believe, graduated from high school in Vienna, right? If that places you. But how old were you when you went to Pakistan with your family?
Five.
Um, you were five. And what language did you speak when you got there?
Well, so obviously, I'm fortunate. I come from an English-speaking family,
Hmm.
and so I learned Urdu very quickly. I think one of the advantages of children traveling is they immediately pick up the language very easily. So I learned to speak Urdu, even though the school I went to was actually run by Irish nuns. So it was a convent school,
I
and
can
most of
relate to that. Yep.
and most of the students were actually the daughters of a Pakistani military. So there were only two. I think there was a Swiss girl, and I was the only one in the class of 45
Wow.
who was not from Lahore.
I found myself saying "wow" a lot in these podcasts, and I've given up trying to stop saying "wow" because people have done such interesting things. By the way, I wrote a novel in the voice of a nun called Mother Nature. So I had an aunt who was a nun, and that's a whole nother story. So so Pakistan, you're a young girl. You're a young girl, probably right till the time you get to Vienna. Are you savoring this life? I mean, we hear about you're not a military brat, but we hear about military brats. We spent 1 year here, 1 year. Was it a little discombobulating, or was it fun, or
No,
both?
it was fun. It was totally fun. I had parents who really loved what they were doing, loved exploring, going to different countries. My father would spend, hours figuring out how we could go back to New Zealand on home leave, which is what the UN provides, you know, international employees. And he would figure out how many stops we could make. So it would be the Acropolis in the morning, Ethiopia in the afternoon. And so I grew up with that enthusiasm, and it's stayed with me.
That's incredible. Did your mom work too, or was she taking care of the all these kids?
She was taking care of all the kids and figuring out how to get food and where we were going to live.
How to get
But
food?
she always found time to do volunteer work. Wherever we lived, there'd be some sort of international women's association, and she would immediately join and be involved and made her friends that way.
Where were you in the hierarchy of children?
Number two.
Number two. That's where I was as well. And so, so you were having fun, and just by chance, I've been to Austria twice in the last year. I absolutely love Austria. So I have to ask you about high school in Vienna, which is not what you would typically say about a Harvard, someone going to Harvard, certainly in our era. But what was that like? I assume you were speaking German at that point. Um, so how did what was that experience like before you got to Harvard?
So interestingly, because my brothers and I are all relatively close in age, at some point my parents decided that maybe they should live somewhere for a while and not be moving around every year or 6 months or whatever. And so Vienna was actually a great choice because, given my father's background, he went to work for the International Atomic Energy Agency,
Oh, you're
which
kidding.
UN agency based in Vienna. And so that was our reason for being in Vienna. And in that case, his job was not a 1 year or 2 year assignment. He was in safeguards, and part of his job was to travel around the world and inspect reactors and lead teams to uh, the kind of teams that we talk about today, going to look for uh, you know weapons, looking for uranium, looking for stockpiling. So that was his career. And then the school I went to in Vienna was very much of an international school. So about half of I would say actually it's a third of the students were American. So embassy, CIA, although we never talked about that at the time, business people,
Yeah.
and about a third were Austrian students whose parents had various reasons for not sending their kids to Austrian schools. Some of them were the kids of opera singers, and they felt like their kids would be. And opera singers are like the stars in Austria, so very
Yeah.
concerned that their kids just might not have a normal school experience. And then about a third were international students, so we fit into that category. And I think there were some 80 nationalities in our school. So people from embassies, people from the UN, as I mentioned, all sorts of backgrounds. And typically families stayed there for a while.
Was there talk at your dinner table of was there nuclear talk?
Actually, there wasn't. My father was one of those people who didn't talk a lot about his work. He went to work, he went on these trips. I remember him getting requests to bring sunglasses or blue jeans to Moscow. I don't know if he did. I don't know how all of that happened,
Mm,
but
wow.
he was very I would say career oriented, very very serious about his profession.
And I'm assuming he's passed away.
Yes, he has.
And because I'd love to ask him about what's going on today. You probably would too, right?
Right.
Be so interesting to hear about that. I actually had an uncle on the Atomic Energy Commission, so this is something I've used in my fiction. It's such a great, such an interesting subject. So you were so did you so he was really a scientist, right? Is it fair to call him that?
Yes. Oh, absolutely a scientist.
Yeah. So, what about you? I'm sensing you weren't necessarily drawn to that, but you ended up an art consultant, which you are now to this day. When did that kind of love of art start to percolate?
So the love of art really goes way back. My parents were always interested in archaeological sites, so no matter where we traveled, they
Mm,
were determined to get a Jeep and go off and check out, Mohenjo-Daro or wherever it was. So I kind of
You're
grew up.
experiencing these things firsthand, these famous. I'm sorry, Jane, to interrupt, but you're experiencing everything firsthand. For us, we're just. I'm sorry. Could you say that again?
Oh, the place that we went to, or the so
I,
my no my so my parents loved were great fans of history, of literature, and so wherever we lived, if there were interesting archaeological sites or ancient cities, it was they made a point of making sure that we visited them. And
yeah,
sometimes it was in a Jeep and it took 3 days to get there, and we who knows what we ate, but it was something that I grew up with. And the same was true with going to museums. I mentioned my father would make a stop in Greece just for 24 hours so that we could go to the Acropolis, see the Acropolis, and go to the art museums. So I definitely grew up with art. And then living in Vienna, one cannot live in Vienna and not become an opera fan, an art fan, and just and really absorb all of
not to
that.
mention all classical music. And I have a friend who has been living all over the world. With he and his wife have like been in all these different places. And I asked him. Now they're in Paris. I said, "What's your favorite city?" He said, "Vienna." He said Vienna is their favorite city. So it must really be something. But I'm struck by how well one thing is that you when we experience these works of art, um, like the ones you just mentioned, we see them in a book or we see them, on a screen. But you were like got to see everything firsthand, and I'm really curious how that maybe changed your perception of art as you moved into your career because it's one thing to sort of experience. Let me put it this way: if you look at a Jackson Pollock painting in a book, I just don't think you're going to get it. But if you walk up to the painting, if you're this close to the painting, it's like amazing, right? And it's incredible, and you get it. Is do you think that's part of why you brought that love into your whole career in life?
So it's an interesting question. I think it's always been an important part of my life. And I always tell people, if you ever have a chance to meet an artist and the artist is talking about their work, go, or a curator, always go, because there's nothing like that sort of firsthand experience of seeing and learning from the creator. But for me, it took a long time to find art as my career because at the time that I was graduating from high school, I was convinced I was going to be a diplomat, that was really what my goal was. And things happen.
I thought. Did you feel that way when you got to Harvard? I said that's how I sort of remember you, and I'm wondering whether I'm just transposing some misperceptions on that. When you got to Harvard, did you know that? Did you know you wanted to be a diplomat?
That was my goal, and it was sort of complicated because obviously I hadn't grown up in New Zealand, so the New Zealand Foreign Service would not have been interesting, and I probably would have been such an anomaly that they wouldn't have been interested in me. And so I really was setting my sights more on a career with the UN at that time because there were a
Hmm.
number, there's UNICEF, there's UNESCO, I mean, a broad list of possibilities. And towards not, and so anyway, Harvard was complicated for me because I never could quite find the department. I started in government, and then the conversations were always about Vietnam and containment, and it was just so foreign from what I wanted to be studying. So I ended up as a social studies major
Hmm.
because that gave me more freedom. But I felt like I never really had mentors or sort of fit into some, um, I don't know, like classic college path.
Yeah, and
So
I was curious, Jane, that so for my experience of a lot of classmates were, I've realized in doing these that we're children of the '60s, and that we came to Harvard right after Harvard and schools were shutting down in the spring for student protests. That kind of ended when we got there, but nonetheless, we were aware of that, and Vietnam was a gigantic issue, and you're coming at it from a completely different perspective. Did that make it harder to make friends, to relate to people, to find common ground, those sorts of things?
No, I would say not at all. I found actually fitting into Harvard and making friends and finding things that I was interested in very easy. I guess I'm just, curious by my nature and very comfortable in new situations. So, some things like American football. I mean, I remember being invited to watch a football game and sitting in the special area for freshmen,
Yeah.
friends of freshman players, and sitting there and thinking, oh my gosh, I know nothing about football. And here I am watching this game. It's not cricket, it's not soccer. I mean, so it
You had
was
never seen a game. You had never seen a game before.
no. So there were those sorts of cultural
A little
experiences
bit
that
of culture shock. But of course, growing up as you did, going from country to country, that's obviously put you in a situation where you weren't a fish out of water. That was just what the water you always swam in. But you're the first person in these podcasts who said I had no trouble making friends. It was easy. I think that's pretty, maybe more unique than you might think. Like it wasn't easy for most people. Most people, it was pretty. There was adjustment, right? There was adjustment that had to happen. So you start to evolve a bit, and when did you know that you were going to pursue a career as an arts or as an arts consultant?
So actually, for me, it was a second career. So
Oh, I didn't know
quick,
that.
quickly, just to explain, so when I graduated from Harvard, I was still very much thinking about a career with the UN, and very quickly came to realize that that would not happen for one very important reason. My father was still very much involved in his career, and therefore, the UN had very, very strict nepotism rules. And it
Well,
wasn't just within, UNDP or UNESCO or whatever it is, it was really UN wide. So very quickly I came to realize that there would be no opportunity there. And then I
hmm.
set my sights on perhaps the World Bank, but my older brother, we talked about me being number two, in this family of five kids, he went to work for the World Bank. So all of a sudden, that opportunity was simply not open to me. And that was when I had to rethink whether I was going to go to a school of diplomacy or whether I was going to pursue an MBA and have a career in the business world, in
Hmm.
particular, that sort of international business world. So after a year in Afghanistan, that's where my parents had been since my sophomore year of college. I spent a year in Afghanistan, and that was sort of my time to think about what I was going to do next. And I applied to Harvard Business School, went to the business school, and essentially had to redirect myself. And I knew a lot about luxury goods. I knew, sort of my art background was already part of my being, if you will. So going to work in luxury goods was very interesting at that time because most of the LVMH and on and on, many of those companies were family owned and they had teams of artists and artisans who worked in those firms. So that was just a wonderful opportunity for me to get back into sort of thinking about art, thinking about creativity, workmanship,
Hmm.
materials, all of those sorts of things. So I had a career with French luxury goods marketing firms for a number of years. And at some point, I did get married. And I lived this life between Kansas City and New York for a number of years. And then when we moved to New York, I had this moment where I looked at luxury goods and I said, oh my gosh, this has changed. There are now these conglomerates. The motive is profit, you know, money, money, money.
Different
And
ball.
somehow the fun part of it was no longer there. And that's when I said, right, what do I really love? I really love art. I really love going to auctions. I spend my weekends learning from, going to Cooper Hewitt to learn about Irish furniture or jewelry exhibition to
I
learn.
didn't know there was such a thing. That's good to know.
There were. Now that I've figured out how to make money
Yeah, yeah.
teaching people these things. But at that time, the auction houses really were interested in um, educating whoever was interested. So when I started to work in the art world, I actually worked with somebody else for a number of years.
Mhm.
And that was my opportunity to really learn the business of art. I knew the art, certainly knew business, but there are sort of the ways that the art world works.
Mhm.
And so I had an opportunity to learn that before going out on my own.
I don't know if you remember, but we actually met on an airplane coming back from Kansas City. Do you remember that?
Oh my gosh, I do. I
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
That's such a long time ago.
I don't
Wow.
think you were married yet, but I was going back and forth with my sports company. We were doing a deal with Sprint, and Sprint was based there. And the beauty of it was we got to stay at the Ritz for $99 a night, so it was like such a vacation. It was one of the best periods of my life. But I bumped into you. I don't think you were married, but you were there because of you had met a guy and who's now your husband, and so I saw you just this little snapshot of Jane Borthwick flying through the air, you might say, and then didn't see you again. I don't think until at least the 25th and then the 40th. I think that's the kind of the only times we've intersected. But before we get into the the fullness of your art career, your old friend John Kiernan, your old boyfriend John Kiernan, Jane, um, told me that I should ask about Afghanistan, because you I guess started a company there, and of course our future overlapped with Afghanistan in so many different ways moving forward. I also wanted to mention that I recently read a book by a memoir by Tom Freston, who was CEO of MTV and then Viacom, and he was in Afghanistan doing the same thing you were, and he ended up having deep ties to Afghanistan as well. I don't know if you've ever met him. I haven't, but you did something pretty entrepreneurial in Afghanistan, didn't you, that year?
It was interesting. So when I went, as I explained, my family was already based there. And my father is head of UNDP, which is my nation's development program. So he had a pretty big job. And when I went to Afghanistan, I was hoping that I would somehow find something I could do uh, UN related. And I should backtrack. The two summers that I spent there after essentially my junior and sophomore years, I worked in hospitals in Afghanistan. And I
Oh,
worked with, because I could do that as an assistant to, in each case, it was a UN woman who they had clinics and they were working with families, with women and children in particular.
hmm.
So when I went back, it wasn't so easy to do something like that, and I don't remember why. So I had two jobs in Kabul. One was the job where I would go to customs every probably 2 weeks with a big truck and an Afghan driver and an assistant, and we would clear shipments that were coming into Afghanistan that were for the UN, and it
Hmm.
could be anywhere from equipment to simply whiskey for the UN commissary. So that was one of my jobs, and the second one was working for a Canadian company that was shipping essentially textiles
Hmm.
and fabricated garments from Afghanistan to Montreal, and they needed somebody to check quality control things before they were shipped. And I learned how to sew when I was quite young and made most of my clothes in high school. So checking for
Oh,
sewing mistakes or whatever
interesting.
was very, very easy for me to do. So that
Yeah.
was my second job. And then still not having reconciled what I was going to do next in my life, I actually started a small company and started exporting from Afghanistan to the US, which I did for several years. And the money I made basically paid for me to go to business school. So,
Okay. So you're a successful entrepreneur in Afghanistan. Not many people can say that. Um, but I recommend that Tom Freston book to you. There's like a lot of it's about Afghanistan. I was actually pretty surprised. And he, at the end of his career, which is more recently, he went back and is doing stuff in Afghanistan. Post-war Afghanistan, I guess we'd have to call it now. So I want to dig into your art career. How did you get started in it? What was your first job? And I'm also curious to ask, you never felt like an artist yourself. It sounds like maybe an artisan, but not an artist.
I think that's true. I can appreciate things, but I'm not creative in that way.
So how did you get started? What was the transition?
The transition was relatively easy because I worked with somebody who had worked at Sotheby's for many years and he'd left to start his own art advisory firm. So the expectation was that I would not only work on projects that he had, but I would also bring in my own projects over
Hmm.
time. And so essentially that's how it happened. It's like being in the art world. You go to auctions, you meet people, you meet collectors, you meet artists, and somehow then people are like, oh, I know somebody who can help you authenticate that painting or sell that piece of sculpture or track down something by that artist. So it sort of by osmosis.
So you're kind of, is it like detective work? Because it sounds like you're buying, you're helping people buying, you're authenticating, you're actually discovering artists to some degree, and then you're making recommendations to corporations, wealthy people about buying this art. Is that a good summary?
It's a summary, but it's not really what I've specialized in. So I've
Okay.
specialized in helping collectors who have already formed collections,
Hmm.
families that have inherited collections and are at a point where they're making decisions. So decisions about, should we donate to some of this to a museum? Should we distribute it to family members? Should we sell it? How would we sell it? How would we donate it? How can we fairly distribute art? And that's really my niche, I would say, is taking on sometimes really complicated, difficult projects and things that other people think are crazy. But I like the sort of detective
What
work.
what would, what okay, so what would be an example of that? And also, what's the oddest or most interesting thing you've ever had to evaluate a work of art?
Oh my gosh. So I work with artwork, meaning paintings and sculpture. I also work with jewelry. I mean, a broad range. I would say sort of tangibles, collectible types of tangibles. And the most complicated and probably fascinating one was a collector family had skull fragments of Beethoven's.
Oh, gee. Okay,
True
that's a
story.
place to
So,
start.
so thinking of sort of intriguing and, given my background living in Vienna, I just immediately thought I have to work on this project. And it was an interesting story because actually the story made sense. So the Beethoven at one point he's buried in Vienna, had been exhumed and moved to a different location.
Yeah.
And a couple of professors at the medical school of Vienna decided that they wanted to get involved and they were really interested in kind of studying his skull and seeing if there was anything there about, genius, I don't know, patterns or whatever it is. But anyway, they had access to Beethoven's body. And so they decided they would take some little souvenirs from the back of the skull where nobody would notice because obviously Beethoven is lying.
Oh, they stole his skull.
Well, no, some fragments. These were fragments, not the skull, but just some little souvenirs, these
Were
two.
they were they looking? Was DNA involved in it at this point?
No, but much later, actually, these
Yeah.
fragments were used in the DNA analysis with hair from Beethoven, because, of course, after Beethoven died, everybody wanted to have a lock of his hair. So there were many, many locks of hair sort of floating around Vienna for
This
no
is
reason.
this is pretty weird, Jane. It's pretty weird. I think.
So,
What
so
happened? What was the outcome?
So the outcome was interesting. So anyway, learning what I could about the story, kind of researching uh, the family, and it wasn't just skull fragments. The family had family friends who were friends with Goethe and other sort of interesting intellectuals of the era, and so it seemed to me like the best opportunity might be to sell this small collection of things, not just the fragments, but an actual sort of like a family collection, if you will, of mementos from that era. And my first phone call was to the major auction house in Vienna, the Dorteum, so I knew it quite well, and I eventually got in touch with the right person and said, this is what this family has, and they'd like to sell them, and or what are the other possibilities. And this person was great. I mean, the conversation was in German, but what he basically said to me, he said, "We do not sell body parts." And I want to say, you mean even from Beethoven, like Vienna's, with Mozart, sort of like, favorite son.
Yeah,
So
and I have a couple of
that
toenails for Mozart for you.
right.
You know.
So that was the end of it. But then some years later, as I said, the fragments were used and were,
Yeah.
authenticated.
Now you're still. This is work you're still doing essentially, right?
Yeah,
Is it the same basic? And you're going to keep working, right?
I'm going to keep working as long as I have interesting
Yeah.
projects that I love what I'm doing, and I
Yeah.
feel like I make a difference.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I agree. I mean, if you have that, you're lucky. Let's face it. Not everybody has that, but if you do have that kind of thing, it's really great. Now, listen, I want to pivot a little bit because I think, Jane, you actually are a diplomat. I think you actually became a diplomat of Radcliffe. Um, and I was, thinking about what would be the right question to ask you about Radcliffe. And one question I have is, as we all know, you were the first Radcliffe class to be in the Harvard Yard in 1972, right? 1972, 71, 72. Um, and and I guess it would have been 72. And I guess my question to you is, do you think your relationship with Harvard and with Radcliffe would have been different had you been in a class 1 year earlier or 1 year later? Would that have changed things? Because it was kind of it was an important year for Radcliffe in many ways.
So I guess I would have to go back to my decision to apply to Radcliffe because I went through. I mean, I had as a senior at my international school in Vienna, I could have gone to the University of Vienna. I could have taken another year and gone to a university in Great Britain,
Sure.
or I could have, which is what I did, sort of look at American colleges. And the primary, I would say, education at my school, because it was international, was really, and this is before there was international baccalaureate, which definitely changed things for students, but was really the American system. So I took SATs and and all of that. And my mother had a friend who was a Wellesley graduate, and I think this friend had convinced my mother that I should definitely go to Wellesley. So I think most of my senior year, I was fairly sure I would go to a good American college if I got in, and Wellesley was kind of my top choice. And I had
All
some
women, all women.
all women, which was actually, on one hand, I felt, okay, I've had four brothers, this will be fine. On the other hand, I thought, yeah, but I do care about my social life. So I wasn't kind of all in on that. But I had she was a substitute teacher at my school, and she had a very international background. I think her husband was actually in Vienna for some CIA thing, as I learned later on. But when she asked me what I was planning to do for college, and I said, well, I think I'll probably go to Wellesley. Or if I don't get in, then I'll, go to England for a year. And she sort of said, oh, no, 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 no. You belong at Radcliffe. So And this was probably November of my senior year, so I
Good
wrote away.
call. Yeah.
So I wrote away for the, of course, the catalog. That's what you did in those days. You wrote a
Yep.
letter, you'd
Yep.
wait, get the
Yep.
mail. So when I looked at the catalog, I thought, wow, this looks great. There's this image of women getting into a boat to row, and somehow it made a huge difference. And I thought, okay, I'll go to Radcliffe. I'll probably live at Radcliffe, and maybe I'll take classes at Harvard. That was sort of my understanding. Is
Oh,
that
interesting.
I thought there would be a Radcliffe, with a great big name on the front, like the
Yeah.
University of Vienna. I just felt there
Like
was,
what they used to call a sister school.
yeah,
Yeah. But that wasn't the case.
no, that wasn't the case. But
What did you find instead when you got to school?
I would say, in terms of the relationship with Radcliffe, I mean, it was pretty messy. It was, women's sports really weren't getting the support that they needed either from Radcliffe or from Harvard. There was a Radcliffe Alumni Association. We had tea with the president of Radcliffe, but Radcliffe really was not a living, breathing presence, I think, for most of
And,
us.
and I haven't I've wanted to drop this little tidbit into other conversations, but I haven't had a chance. So Bettina Horner was the president of Radcliffe, right? And she had written a really something that went viral about women's fear of success. She was a scholar of something or other. I'm not sure what, but this got a lot of traction. It was very much in the conversation. So even the head of Radcliffe had a take on women, accurate or not, whatever, but was controversial and sort of in the conversation. But did you ever feel you were, or do you feel that you were a graduate of Radcliffe, a graduate of Harvard, or a graduate of Harvard Radcliffe?
So I feel like I am a graduate of Harvard Radcliffe or Radcliffe Harvard, because I always, I mean, back then and now, appreciate being part of this sort of tradition of academic excellence that I
Mhm.
believe Radcliffe students thrived on and achieved.
But
And when
didn't
one,
Harvard students have that too? Isn't that the whole point of Harvard, to have that kind of excellence academically?
uh, I don't, I mean, sure, Harvard has it. But Harvard already had it, and they have their distinguished graduates. But how many females were there on that list when we, right?
Of
When we were,
distinguished graduates when we got there.
there were almost no faculty. I had only one female professor. That was Emily Vermeulen for part of Fine Arts 13. I don't remember any section people that I had were women. I was in social studies, so the head of social studies was a woman. But there really was not a strong sense of women's presence either in the administration at Harvard or certainly, in the classroom. So
Your,
naturally,
your, your class gets to the yard the first time ever, but it sounds like there's no infrastructure. There's nobody really has done anything to prepare the ground for that. And what was the result of that kind of shifting sands underneath you, so to speak? What did that mean in terms of interactions with other Radcliffe students and so on?
so interaction with other Radcliffe students, I feel like I definitely had that right from the beginning. I went out for freshman crew. I made friends there who have been lifelong friends. So I definitely sought out opportunities to be with other women. I had four roommates, and so I felt like I definitely had the company of women, but certainly not any women that I could have gone to for academic advice, any kind of,
Hmm.
life advice.
Yeah.
I felt like we were really kind of on our own.
And you were
So,
in Stoughton, Jane? Is that right?
no, no, I was in Weld.
Oh, you were in Weld. Okay. When you think back on the years at school, were they happy years for you? Ultimately, are you glad you went there?
Uh, I'm I'm glad I went there because I've made so many incredible friends and people are so meaningful to me now in my life. I probably would have made friends wherever I went. I
Yeah.
think I think that not enough attention was given to the needs of women students at that time because we were very much a minority. And I've learned over time that we had classmates who were going through some really difficult times and they were basically coping on their own. And that wouldn't, today, I mean, you look at universities today and the student services and the counseling and, academic and personal accommodations and so on. It's a completely different landscape. So I
What were
feel
the
like
difficult
what we
things?
were- Hmm?
I'm sorry. What were the difficult things women were going through while you were there?
Well, first of all, there was no dean of students for Radcliffe students. I mean, you weren't going to go to Skiddy Van Stade or whoever that group of.
Can you believe there was a guy named Skiddy von Stade? I mean, come on.
I know, but there really wasn't. I mean, we had a graduate student who was sort of the proctor. If no, I don't know what the name was, but anyway, whatever the housing advisor, whatever in Weld, and he would come and knock on our door and want to talk to one of my roommates all the time. So we automatically wanted to have no interaction with him because he just seemed like a kind of trustworthy guy.
He was a war dogger. Yeah.
Right. So there was nowhere to go to say, you know what, I'm having a problem or my roommate's having a problem. I had a roommate who was bulimic, who ended up leaving Harvard. And I didn't really recognize it at the time, but clearly it was a sign of distress of some sort.
Yeah.
So I feel like we were just on our own. And I
Left
don't think,
left
yeah,
hanging.
right.
And so this has clearly, I think, has something to do with why you've been so involved with bringing Radcliffe women together, to the point where you are one of the organizers of Radcliffe women having their own reunion before the reunion starts or the other reunion starts on June 1st and June 2nd. And so why is that important? I mean, when I first heard that, I was, and we're not invited. Let's be clear. Like, no interest, not even a little interest in having any man there from Harvard, not even gay men. Um, why is it important to all of you to do this now?
I think it's grown over time, and I trace it back to. So I've been involved with. I was a class marshal. I've been involved with reunions, and starting with the fifth reunion, which actually I was in Cambridge at the time, and I was the chair of that. I conceived this idea of having a Radcliffe session, so just getting the Radcliffe classmates together. And it was not at the exclusion of Harvard classmates, it was just, a Radcliffe session. And that grew because after that, at every reunion, we had a similar Radcliffe session, same thing. Usually it was on, as Kiwis would say, at the back of Beyond. I mean, it was some place in near, often actually near Radcliffe, that we didn't even know how to get there. But it was always an afterthought, I guess is the way to think about it. It was not a core feature of the Harvard reunions. And so then I don't know, my mind just kept working on, how why is it that we get together? We have such a great time. We have so much to talk about. We celebrate, we talk, we share stories. And why is it this only happens once every 5 years in this very, sort of ad hoc way in a sense? So
Yeah.
that got me thinking about the 50th anniversary of Women Living in the Yard, which I thought would be a wonderful opportunity
Yeah.
to not just for the women who lived in the yard, but for all of my Radcliffe classmates to
Yeah.
get together. And it's really grown since that particular meetup. And it could only be 50 people. It was post COVID. No interest from Harvard or Radcliffe in us doing anything like that. No,
Is
no,
that
no.
right? Nobody, they didn't care. They didn't
They
care.
they do not care.
They
Or
did not.
let's put it this way: They will not support anything that is focused on either the Harvard classmates or the Radcliffe classmates.
Yeah.
So, in other words, I think it has to do with the merger when Harvard assumed responsibility for all alumni affairs. I believe that was the time at which that was sort of the end of any Radcliffe alumni association. So that's the reason. I mean, if you trace this back, it's not this desire to be separate in sort of some political way. It's just finding a way to spend time together, to talk about the things we care about, and to learn from one another. I mean, we have panels of classmates. We're learning about their careers. We're learning about their challenges and what they've accomplished in their lives. And so when we get together, those are the things we talk about. We do not talk about our Harvard classmates, just FYI.
If I were writing a newspaper story about this, I'd say that Jane Borthwick did not go to Wellesley and all women's college, but she's kind of created a little bit of that, a little bit of that flavor moving forward. But Jane, you are a beloved classmate, not just of mine, but your name comes up all the time. People really understand how important you've been to making this happen. I'm a little jealous we don't get to be part of it, but that's the whole point that we're not part of it. I mean, it wouldn't be a thing if we were there. So no, I think it's great. I hope, and I'm sure you're going to continue it in some fashion moving forward. Is my guess? Is that right?
No, absolutely. And it's interesting. We're not alone in terms of being a Radcliffe class or Radcliffe group that is really interested in the history of Radcliffe, but also in the history of our classes, our classmates. So there's a great movement at this time to collect the stories, the written histories, the oral histories
Yeah.
of Radcliffe women, and make sure that those become records or become part of the Radcliffe College archive at Schlesinger.
And in fact, there will be a presentation, I guess, a movie or a film about the oral histories taken at Radcliffe, which I'm sure is going to be fascinating. I think that's in the afternoon. I'm thinking maybe Wednesday
Yes,
of,
that's
of the week at 3:30.
yeah.
But Jane, thank you so much for doing this. You were my first choice, and I have tremendous regard for you, and happy to be a classmate of yours. And I think that your life is among the most interesting, not just because you've been in a lot of different places, but because of what you did in those different places. So, thanks for sharing that with us. And as I like to say at the end of these, see you at reunion.
Well, thanks, Mike. I know people are watching these. I've heard about them. So you too are showing some great leadership and doing good things for our class. So thank you.
Yeah, it turns out. I mean, I had no Jane when I spoke to you. Remember, I was in Montana when I spoke to you, and about this. And honestly, I had no expectations. I really did not. I just felt like I had made a commitment to do it, and it kind of plagued me. But I'm so happy I did it. We've got at least 20 more to go after the reunion, so stay tuned. But what's been great is some people have reconnected and they've learned about each other in a way that, like, let's face it, there's not enough time at reunion to really hear like what we just heard of your life. So there's a place for this. I hope other classes do something like this because it's really been fun and it's been interesting. But can't wait to see you. And I guess we'll see you at. And you know what? When I see you, I want you to tell me about that other reunion.
Oh no, shh. What's said there stays there. So
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, Jane, you take care.
you
See
too.
you. Bye bye.